welcome to Broken Entertainment. So, at various times I've thought about doing a review of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings, and every time I've sat down to do that, I struggle to come up with a review that has anything to do with the book. And by that I mean, books like this, for me, have a specific impact, and when they do, it's not something I can just sit down and pick apart, talk about. It's not one of those books. For me, I believe that every creator has, and not even necessarily creators, but every person has, of course, major events in their life that shape their life. They also have things in their life that shape their life. And for creators, frequently, that's books you've read, movies you've watched, TV shows you've seen, manga you've read, comics you've read, characters that have inspired you to move forward in your own writing or your own creativity. And that's what The Way of Kings is to me. It is one of those pivotal pieces of entertainment without which I would be a different person as a creator. And there's those pieces kind of scattered throughout my life. Different stories, different TV shows, different movies, different books that inspired me in some way. I used to be a massive Steven Spielberg fan when I was younger because he was a huge inspiration for me, especially after I watched Jurassic Park. That was probably the turning point movie for me as a creator. And maybe sometime we can sit down and we can go into depth about all that as to really why. Because it's a long, very complicated, drawn out story. I don't want to get into all of it right now, but suffice to say it had an enormous impact on me as a creator. And when you have those moments, it's not something you can just sit down. I could not sit down with you, watch Jurassic Park, and pick it apart. I can pick apart Jurassic Park 2, I can pick apart Jurassic Park 3, and by pick apart, I don't necessarily mean tear down. Just pull apart and look at. Or I could do it with Jurassic World, and I didn't care about Fallen Kingdom. But Jurassic Park, the movie, the first one, and the novel as well, I can't review them. I just can't. I can point to you things that I like, but they were so pivotally important to me that I can't give it a fair shakedown, and that is The Way of Kings. I cannot do a review any justice whatsoever on The Way of Kings because it gave me a genre back. I have struggled for so long to read fantasy novels. And I love Lord of the Rings. And I love Anne McCaffrey's Pern series before it became more sci-fi than fantasy. And when I go to read modern fantasy, I've put down so many books. And I've always enjoyed fantasy. I've played lots of D&D. I run D&D campaigns. I create worlds in D&D. And I love playing Warhammer Fantasy. And I love the races in Warhammer Fantasy. And I love the world in Warhammer Fantasy before it became Age of Sigmar. More on that later. But I can't get into it, or I couldn't. I couldn't get into anything basically written after 1960s. I'd pick it up, I'd start reading through it, and whatever, and put it down. And I can't even tell you what it was about The Way of King. It grabbed me from the beginning, and I read it, and it was like it was like I had been on some really dark road, and then all of a sudden all the streetlights kicked on. I was like, oh. So I can read fantasy. And I couldn't even tell you why I've put down a lot of the fantasy books I've put down, other than they just didn't do anything. It felt like they didn't have anything to say, and it felt like they didn't have anything interesting within them. There's a lot of push now for fantasy writers to not include a lot of the classic races. There's a lot of push for them to do different settings and so on. And it's okay to not include the classic races, but I feel like in trying to not include the classic races, some authors pick a race or two and use it, and you're like, eh. You know, one of them had giants, and I didn't care. I'm like, giants. Giants don't do anything for me. I just don't care. One of them had a time travel plot, and as soon as I realized the time travel plot, I'm like, okay, I know where this is going, and I don't care. One of them had dinosaurs, like dinosaur knights. I thought that was a cool concept, but I, I don't know. It just never really grabbed me in any way. The characters in that one didn't really stand out. Same with the one with the giants. Like, people, okay. You know, the world building was alright. Never really got far enough to find the magic system. And when I read The Way of Kings, it was like, oh, there you are. The characters grabbed me from page 1, not counting the prologue, because prologues are different. The very opening of the main part of the book grabbed me. You know, Zeth wore white on the day he was to kill a king. That's the kind of opening line where you're like, okay, I gotta go and I gotta see what's gonna happen, because this guy's wearing white and he's gonna kill a king, and I'm on page 1. And then I met Kaladin. It's an awesome character. Has real world struggles, you know. He fights with depression. And he fights with, I forget what they call it, but the thing where where bad weather gets you down. You know, I think everybody has that to some extent, but some people it gets pretty intense. And it made him immediately relatable. And you're like, here's a guy that got screwed over by the system, right? And then you meet Dalinar, and by the time you meet Dalinar, you're almost as jaded as Kaladin. You're like, they're all, you know, the nobility, they're all corrupt, they're all horrible, and then you meet Dalinar, and you're like, oh. And I think that's part of it. It's a book where some of the characters get pretty down. Kaladin gets pretty dark, but they all have this limited window that they've kind of like held shut, or somebody else maybe has held shut, and they go through it, and when they see the world, they see it through this limited window, and they just don't have anything really. You know, these people are always bad, these people are always this, things are always this way. And then as the book progresses, that window gets wider. And they start to understand. It takes an entire 1,000-page book for Kaladin. And yes, there's vague spoilers here, but it takes an entire 1,000-page book for Kaladin to say, okay, well, that Light Eyes isn't bad. And when I look around the world, in media in particular, with the way a lot of media treats fans and treats people and acts, I see people out to divide. I see people pushing agendas who only have this limited window. And they look at everything through this limited window. So when I see characters doing it, and that window opening over time, it's like, okay, that's what I want to see. I don't want to see, this is why I can't read A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't want to see a world in which it's hard to quantify. Okay, I am fine with darkness. I am fine with horrible things happening in books, but I'm only fine with it up to a point. And I'm not dissing A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, look, George R. R. Martin has had a huge impact on a lot of people. He's had this book for a lot of fans and a lot of creators who are inspired by and driven by the things that George R. R. Martin has done. So I don't want to take anything away from him. Yes, I have made videos talking about will he complete Winds of Winter? Does he owe the fans anything? So on and so forth. Yes, I have my negative things to say about him, but you can't deny what he has accomplished with A Song of Ice and Fire. Whether or not he finishes it is separate from that reality. And when I read this book, it was just like, okay, yes, there's very dark places, but people come out of it and people improve as human beings, and they improve as whatever their profession is, and some of that improvement takes multiple books to start. Okay, spoiler, if you haven't read it, maybe pause it for a little bit. But, spoiler, it takes Elhokar, the king of Alethkar, it takes him 3 books to come to terms with the fact that he is a bad king and a weak king. But he does come to that realization. In a lot of other books, he would have never done it. He would have always been the bad king who didn't understand. But his window gets opened up. And he sees the world. And he sees who he is. And he does some really deep, reflective thinking. The kind of thinking most human beings engage in only occasionally in their lifetime. Where you rethink almost everything about your life. And he comes out of that a better person. And that ultimately, I think, is what does it with The Way of Kings. And the rest of the Stormlight Archive to other extents. People realizing they can fight through their situation. People realizing they can improve as human beings. People, it appearing that everything is bleak and dark, and then yet here comes a person who is the things you thought everybody else was. They reach that place and they improve, rather than stagnating or getting worse. And I have a optimistic view in some regards that people improve with time. Now, not everybody does. Let's not pretend everybody does. But I like to see that reflected in some way in my entertainment. It's why I'm a huge Superman fan. Superman always does the right thing. And a lot of people say that makes him boring. Well, I say his personification of the moral right thing to do, his blue Boy Scout mentality, if you will, is what makes him a good character, because it is unusual. It is alien. People have trouble being that kind of person all the time. I like Batman too. Don't get me wrong. You know, I'm a 40K fan. So, you know, a little darkness is fine. But The Way of Kings showed me that I could read fantasy past 1960. And it's like, here's a whole genre back. And I'm writing a fantasy novel called Shadow Empire. And I started writing it before I read The Way of Kings because I said, gosh, if I can't read a fantasy novel, then maybe I need to make one that I can read. You know, maybe I should put something out there that is the kind of thing I want to see. So when I write Shadow Empire, the world starts out in a pretty unfortunate place. And it doesn't necessarily realize it, but one of the underlying themes of Shadow Empire is where extremism and narrow windows take people and places, nations. And that is not a permanent state of being. But then I read The Way of Kings and I said, oh, there are fantasy books that I can enjoy now. They exist. And the only reason I read The Way of Kings, by the way, is because of how Brandon Sanderson treats his fans. The way he interacts with people. The fact that he puts lectures for free online on how to write. I said, finally, I'm going to give this guy a chance. I put everybody else down. Maybe he'll do something for me. And he gave me the fantasy genre back. I read all the way through Oathbringer. I have not read Rhythm of War because there's another book that will eventually come out in 3 to 4 years, and I don't really want to be caught up on it yet. So I'm kind of waiting, and in the meantime, I'm going through Mistborn, which is another Brandon Sanderson series. Or I'm re-listening to the audiobooks of Stormlight Archive. And that's what entertainment does for a lot of creators, is it inspires you, and it pushes you, and it shows you, hey, you can show something you want to see. You can write, you can draw, you can paint, whatever. Something that you want to see. And it is out there. You are not the only one. And that's why on this channel I cover a lot of issues that are negative, where it's like, man, it just feels like our whole entertainment industry is going down the toilet. And it's because I know how important entertainment is. And how important a lot of these franchises are that are suffering and struggling, whose fan bases are left in the dark. And it's why I question George R. R. Martin. Some people in the comments are like, why, you don't even read his books. Why are you? Well, because look how passionate, and I did not see the responses coming that I got from those videos. I did not. I knew people liked A Song of Ice and Fire, but people are hugely passionate about A Song of Ice and Fire in ways that I did not realize at all. And it was great. We had a great discussion. People are still posting those videos, and I'm still getting great feedback. And we're still having an awesome discussion about George R. R. Martin. And in some cases, it's just people saying what he means to them and what his books mean to them and why they're upset that they may not get the ending. And, it's why I get on Disney for the thing that they have done, for their soulless reboots and their soulless live action garbage, and why I get on them for Raya and the Last Dragon, which could have been an incredible film if they had just dropped some of the nonsense and spent a little more time in letting the world grow. Because I see what this means to me, and I see what it means to other people, and I see, for me, Jurassic Park, Raptor Red, the Battletech series, and some specific books within that, The Way of Kings. And there's personal ones too that aren't related to creativity, but these are books that all meant and still mean something to me that I can't even necessarily quantify and physically explain. But they push me along my creative path. And there are movies within that as well. Of course, I said Jurassic Park. I was meaning the book, but also the movie. Stephen King's entire film career before he became just a put my name on the front cover man. George Lucas in Star Wars, Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek, Captain Picard, for me in particular, and Geordie LaForge, also in particular. So, when I see these things being dismantled by people who don't care, by careless individuals who just want to shove an agenda down our throats, I get upset. And people say, well, it's just a movie. You know, well, it's not, though. For a lot of people, Star Wars is not just a movie. And I think a lot of creators in the large sort of corporate atmosphere of a place like Hollywood lose sight of this. You know, if you look at the people who have had the biggest impact, when they had the biggest impact, they weren't corporate yet, for the most part. And it's because they were still driven. They were still doing things that inspired people, and they were still drawing inspiration. And once they become producers, it just kind of goes away. And that happens, and it's unfortunate. But then you see there are millions, I would say. I would go out on a limb and say millions of people whose lives have been deeply and dramatically impacted by Star Wars at various points. You know, there are people who saw the original movies and they can sit down and they can talk to you like it was yesterday. And maybe it didn't shape their lives, but it had an impact. It had meaning. And people are turning on it and tearing it apart. And that's why this channel is called Broken Entertainment, because I see pieces of our entertainment laying all over the floor. And I try to cover things in as positive a light as I can when I can. But sometimes things are just negative. But they don't stay that way. And that's why I have said repeatedly, it is so important for us as creators, anyone out there listening who is a creator or has even thought about being a creator, get out there and do it, because that's what we need. We don't need more mega corporations owning more crap. We need people out there doing the kinds of work, creating the kinds of properties that inspire people. How many scientists have said over the years, I was inspired to become a scientist by Star Trek? Now me, I wasn't inspired by Star Trek to become a scientist. That wasn't what I took out of Star Trek. I'm more of a science fantasy guy than I am a hard science fiction guy. So I took different meanings out of Star Trek. It's hard to see that kind of stuff happen. So I point it out. And it's not always happy. But I point it out when I see it. And then I try to remind myself and the people who listen to my videos, this is happening. But it doesn't have to be everything. You know, after a point, you put the body in the ground and you walk away. And we've all still got the old stuff, right? You can still go watch the original Star Wars. You can still go watch Captain Kirk and Captain Picard, Captain Janeway, Captain Archer. You can still go read the old comics. If you focus too long on what is being damaged and only on what is being damaged, you lose sight of the inspiration. And you lose sight of saying, okay, fine, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make something that one day somebody's going to read and it's going to set off a light for them. That's what got me working, not on my sci-fi. The sci-fi came from a different place, but on my fantasy novel, that was what did it. And being fed up with seeing a world that's full of ideology and extremism. Everywhere you look, it feels like it's everywhere. So I said, okay, I'm going to write the kind of fantasy novel I want to see. And then I found one. I found The Way of Kings. And it inspired me to do more with my writing. We need to get out there as creators and make stuff like The Way of Kings, like Star Trek, like Star Wars. You need to get out there, put your ideas on a page, put your ideas in a film. Let other people take them in, let other people feel inspired. Because the corporations aren't going to do it for us. Okay, I did that video that showed who owns what, right? And something like 50% of our entertainment is owned by like 3 companies. So when you want to know why every movie seems the same, that's why. And for me, so I'm not going to review The Way of Kings. I may review Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, because I feel like I can review those, but I can't pull myself back from The Way of Kings enough to give it an honest review. I'll say that right now. And I hope that when we move forward as creators, those of us who are creators all have those moments for somebody. Somebody reads it or watches it or what have you. A light goes off in their head, because forget the dead franchises for a minute. Forget Hollywood. Just go out and make something and push it forward. You don't know who needs something at any given time. Let me know what you think of The Way of Kings in the comments down below. If you've read it, if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Let me know what you think of the conversation today in general. Hit the like button if you liked the video. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you next time.